This is Clinton Callahan. I'm in Melbourne, Australia. I'm speaking with Peter Elliard, who's a futurist. I want to talk for a minute about what that means. Peter is the author of 3 books. The first book that he became most famous for was called Ideas for the New Millennium. Since then, he's published 2 additional books. One is called Designing 2050, and a new book that's just coming out right now called Destination 2050, which is a toolkit for future makers, meaning you. So Peter is he's the director of the Preferred Future Institute. And I just want to explain for a moment what that means, because Peter has outlined 6 ways to relate to and deal with the future. One is plausible futures, probable futures, particular futures, prospective futures, preferred futures, and possible futures. And clearly, a conscious human presence on planet Earth would live towards a preferred future. And so that's why he's named his institution called the Preferred Future Institute. I just want to mention one more thing, because it's really wonderful how parallel our work has been. Peter's clearly distinguished 3 orientations in human cultures as we've evolved on planet Earth. The first was orienting ourselves and surviving through tribalism. So our first priority would be to protect the tribe. And this went for many tens of thousands of years, even 100,000 years, until we started the patriarchal cultures and oriented ourselves towards nationalism, meaning protecting our nations as a way of surviving. Nationalism has gotten us this far, and it's not getting us any farther, because nationalism is not sustainable on a closed planet. So the next great shift in cultural orientation is towards what Peter calls planetism, which is a self-explanatory word, meaning taking care of the planet is top priority. Taking care of the planet is the center of the culture. And he's been working towards building toolkits for people to implement in their own lives planetary culture. And I would just feel very honored and grateful to have a bit of time to listen to Peter Elliard speak.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Could you just talk for a bit?
Well, I became a futurist quite late in life. I spent many years working in the environment, and I actually was the first person involved in public policy in the environment in the whole country. And I ran a couple of big environment planning departments and a technology department. So I spent 30 years working in public policy as head of large bureaucracies. And during that time, I became heavily involved in UN systems, particularly the UNDP and UNESCO and the UN Environment Programme. And in 1988, I was offered the job of a new Australian government instrumentality called the Commission for the Future, and I was appointed chief executive of that. So I suddenly became a futurist. I'd really been one in all the time, but so I actually found that this was a great moment for freedom for me, because the one thing about being a futurist is everybody's interested in the future, and everyone wants to shape the future. They might want to shape it for their own advantage or for the world's advantage, or a combination of both. But futures is a lovely term which embraces everything that's possible in the years ahead. And it's funny that we actually haven't spent much time creating a form of futurism about that, or a set of concepts and ideas that underpin that. And I've spent since 1988, building up a coterie of concepts and toolkits to add grist to the whole, or to fill in the details about how we become, to do the 2 things that matter in life. The first is to be successful shapers of the future, because that's, we all want to be that. And we tend to assume, look, some are good at it and some are bad at it. But the simple fact is we can all become better at it. And if we can learn, so I've created a whole toolkit of ideas and concepts to enable people to become more effective shapers of the future, not only in their own personal interest, but in the in the narrow self-interest, but also the extended interest or even the planetary interest. So part of it's about having that toolkit, and I've spent a lot of my time is working around the 5 ways we shape the future, which is management, leadership, planning, design, innovation, and learning. And they're the 6 tools we use to shape the future. And most of us, the planners just use planning and other people use design. But I think we have to all use all of those. And a lot of my work is about the difference between the manager in us and the leader in us. And a lot of people really don't understand that difference. But basically, the fundamental difference is that the manager is what I call the probable future. She says, well, what will the future be like? And therefore, how do I advantage myself or not be disadvantaged by the change which is occurring? That's good management. And I call that the net result of that is becoming what I call a resilient future taker. The other side is the leader part of us, which has the dream coming into, this is my vision, how do I make it happen? I call that if you like, the future maker, the purposeful future maker. And so so we're both. And the question is we have to understand at any one time which hat we're on, whether wearing the manager's hat or the leader's hat. And it's really important to understand. So I spent a lot of time, and I teach MBA students about that and about how a future's perspective on shaping the future, because that's what ultimately, if you look at human purpose, collective human purpose, it all comes down to being successful shapers of the future. In one front, we all want something to be different. We want to see things to be happier, bigger, better, more sustainable, more equitable, whatever it's going to be. And so creating that generic model. And so that was the one part of it, which is the stuff which are the toolkits for us to shape the world around us and make it a better place so we be more successful shapers of the future. The other side is we have to understand while we're doing that, that we are at all the time in one position, and there's all these global trends occurring. So we have to understand, well, if we sit and do nothing, where will we be taken? So I say that's a bit like being in a sailboat in a 6-knot wind and a 3-knot tide. And if you leave the sail down or the hand off the tiller, you go where the tide takes you. That's not a good idea, because tides usually take you onto the rocks. So that's really the probable future. Where's the tide taking us? So if I do nothing, where will I finish up? Okay? That's basically, and then if I'm going to hit the rocks, I have to change. That's good management. The other side is, well, maybe I don't want to go there. Maybe I want to win a race, or maybe I want to go to an offshore island for a picnic. Okay, and if that's the case, I have to say, well, okay, I have to deal with the tide and the wind as elements to go to my preferred future. Okay, and basically designing a preferred future, and the best example of that is George Bernard Shaw, who's Serpent in his play about Methuselah. And he talks about, you see things and ask why, I see things that never were and ask why not. And that really is the difference between the manager and leader part of it. I spent a whole toolkit around management, leadership, design, innovation, and learning. And around innovation, for example, I've created a set of ideas around if I go out 25 years, 70% of the products and services that will be on the earth have yet to be invented. And how do I have a conversation about those so we can actually talk about them now and invent them? And I created a concept I call ways and wheres. And ways are the new things that we do, behaviour issues. And where's the new things we use, like technologies and designs. So, for example, a water conservation way would be shortening a shower from 6 to 3 minutes. And a water conservation where would be a new low volume shower head. And together they create water conservation. So I've now created an entire language which is around how we describe the products we need. For example, around sustainability, ways and wheres for living within perpetual solar income, ways and wheres to turning waste into food, ways and wheres to doing zero net collateral damage. And that's an important one, but of course my bottom line for sustainability is zero net collateral damage to other. But so a sustainable lifestyle would be a lifestyle which does no zero net collateral damage to the world around you. But a healthy lifestyle is living so you don't do zero net collateral damage to self. So I see a relationship between the health agenda and the sustainability agenda. So I create an entire body of work and language so we can actually become more effective shapers of the future in this planetist world which we're coming, which is dominated by 10 value shifts. As we go from modernism to postmodernism to planetism, or from tribalism to nationalism to planetism. There are 10 values which I describe in my books, which are whole planet's whole, even though some of them like democracy and sustainable behaviour, gender equality, not patriarchy, communitarians versus individualism, because we have to make a choice. So, for example, people can't smoke in cafes anymore because that's individual behaviour that causes collateral damage to others. And if I work with coal companies or oil companies, I say, well, look, think about the year 2030. If you emit carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and cause collateral damage to the planet, you'll become a pariah in the same way as the smoke in a cafe does today. Is that enough?
Clear.
So that's the kind of thing I'm doing. I've been creating an entire body of knowledge and language. And the language is really important. I had to create like the ways and wheres. How do I talk a product that doesn't exist? So, well, we need more ways and wheres to live within solar income. And you would know the person who creates those ways and wheres just might become a 21st century billionaire, because the whole planet wants better ways to do that. So I'm now talking about the economy and the market of the 21st century.
You've really indicated, you really hit the heart of the matter, I think, with this identification of 10 values shifts. And so how, I don't know if you've ever experienced that yourself, but what is involved in a person or an organization? But I'm really concerned about the personal value shift experience. How does that happen?
Well, it often happens through trauma, and often happens with meeting an insoluble problem and having to think another way, when more of the same and business as usual doesn't work anymore. And if you are a learner, you'll come to say, well, look, this is not working anymore. And there was a time when, only 20 years ago, that people would say, look, the best form of government is a benign dictatorship. Democracy is a second-rate thing, but now that's completely unacceptable today. Because, and just when the Libyan people are fighting for democracy right now, and the whole planetary public opinion is on the side of the people seeking democracy. That would not have been true 20 years ago. Because we would say, well, they've got that's their problem, we won't be bothered. Because we're involved in mankind, because we're planetists. What goes on in Syria now actually is part of our story. In other words, we all now live in a global village. And the point about a global village is any member of that village, think, for example, if we have an external threat like in a regular village by a flood or a fire, we're all gang together. We may not like each other to protect each other. And now we perceive Al-Qaeda, or we see the government of North Korea as people who are not very planetary friendly, because they're still fighting the old tribal and nationalist battles of yesteryear, not today. And we know that they're dying, but by golly, while they're dying, they can take a long time to die, and they can do a lot of damage while they're dying. And that's really the important thing. But we all know the government of North Korea in 25 years' time will be pretty much the same kind of government South Korea currently has. And the government of Iran won't be run by theocrats anymore, because they're actually making a mess of the economy of Iran. And the middle class of Iran, which is huge, and they've gone into the streets several times, they believe in democracy, they believe in gender equality, they believe in all these things that we believe. They're no different. A middle-class person in Tehran is no different from a middle-class person in Germany or Australia. And the very fact is we now, and see, that the values of the educated middle class, which are basically, because the educated middle class are a group of people who manage to lift themselves out of the struggle for existence, to take a broader view of things, that we have enough success that we can actually think about the things that matter beyond our own personal self-interest and the survival of our own kids. We think about the nature of society, and is it a good place, and can we make it better? People who are struggling for existence don't have that. They're stuck in a tribal mode. First of all, tribalism is based on the fact that anyone who's not a member of your tribe is potentially an enemy. Okay? And it's the same with nationalism. It's pretty much the same. But planetism says, well, we're condemned to share this planet together as it's our only single home. And what we have to do over the next 50 years is reinvent ourselves so we can live happily forever on this planet. And actually, in my books, I document how that's actually happening.
Can you give just a couple of examples from the books in terms of reinventing ourselves?
I think, I mean, for example, around the issue of sustainability has been a huge agenda, because basically sustainability, I mean, basically we said went out and did things and we damaged while we did them. either to ourselves or to others. And now we left a mess. So you have to, an environment department says you've got to clean up that mess, but now we're saying you should prevent the mess. That means you have to redesign things. You don't create a mess in the first place. So, for example, we should have solar-driven cars rather than petroleum-driven cars and so on. And a whole lot of it's simply because we understand now, and that's a good example. I talked about smoking in the cave and smoking on the planet. We asked the smoke on the planet is now causing this disastrous potential climate change, which you all know about. And so this is a collective collateral damage to the whole planet. No exceptions. There's no other us or them. You can't get away from it. We're stuck with it. So we have now to stick together. This is exactly the same sort of thing that people in a small village, when hit by a flood, they have to collaborate to save themselves. So whether you really like each other or not, collaboration is being forced on you by circumstances, because you say, well, this is bigger than each of us. We can have a war over that. But meanwhile, if we have a war over climate change will continue on. It will take us all out eventually. So it doesn't matter who wins that war, they'll lose the battle, you know, or whatever. And that's, so around that kind of issue. Another very important issue is around the concept of democracy. Democracy is booming. You know, at the end of the Second World War, there were just 12 fully fledged democracies on the whole planet. Just 12. There's now 144 at last count. Some of them are imperfect democracies, but they all know that they have to be democratic, otherwise the global disapproval, they'll never be able to join the Euro. As an example, the Serbs have had to send in all their criminal thugs and they're undemocratic, otherwise they can't join the European community, because democracy is now a yardstick for admission to the inner circle. And so democracy, I'm doing a lot of work on the future of democracy, and so much so Australia happens to be one of those original 12 countries. And we do democracy pretty well here. And so I've actually suggested that we have the ability to export democracy to the whole planet, because we should believe democracy is now an export industry. Because the Egyptians don't know how to do democracy. They want it, but they don't know how to do it. There are people who are experts in that. And if you get to the future first, you become an expert. And we got to the future first in that. Another good example of that is I'm very interested in sea rise with climate change. Now, there's one group of people who have been dealing with sea rise for a long time, and that's the Dutch. So can you imagine, I can imagine investing in a dike building firm in Holland today. You just might have a lot of business in the next 20 years, protecting the world's coast as we deal with climate change over time. So because dike building is not just a local thing for Holland, it's now a planetary export industry. So circumstances that some people did things well, and on the opposite side of that equation, the Israelis are world experts in making one molecule of water go farther than anyone else. They're the world expert in making a little bit of water go a long way. And we have those needs too. So the Israeli, if you look at the Dutch and the Israelis and add them up together, last time I looked at this, about 80% of all the UN consultancies in the water area were either the Dutch or the Israelis. Because they got to the future first, and success goes to those who get to the future first. And there's always somebody who, out of necessity to solve a local problem, got to the future first. But now suddenly we'll look around, we've all got the same problem or the same challenge. Suddenly these people came to the centre and they create a global market, because the idea that we have a global market for sustainability and a global market for democracy is just two examples of that. Okay, and there are many others too, but they're two good examples of that.
Yeah.
And because the planet needs more sustainability and more democracy. And so then we have to go back to the whole idea of defining sustainability and defining democracy. There are other issues around defining those issues.
In terms of defining democracy, are you familiar with distributed democracy?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, we tend to have a single view of. Representative democracy is the one we all know about, but clearly with the event of technology and a whole lot of other things, there's no reason we can't have everybody giving an opinion on everything else and dividing. You can ask the question whether we actually need a parliament. You can make that point. I think we do still, but the important point about that is that the empowerment of people and the ability for people to express opinions and make decisions on major things, not just an occasional referendum, but on every issue, can be an important element of democratic futures. And so it's not a much less centralised model of democracy. It's basically there are a few people who are designed to turn the decision into reality, and that's still the bureaucratic centre of the system. But the decision-making power can be widely distributed across the society. And that's happening already. For example, in the Italian elections, which is in about a week's time, there's a whole group of people who are Australians of Italian descent who are going to vote in that election. So if you happen to be an Italian, irrespective of where you are on the planet, you get to vote in that election, and they have their own members of parliament who are representing expatriated Italians. So the concept of democracy is about that. There's a whole lot of things happening in democracy. Democracy is a fascinating issue to me.
I'm going to shift the subject just a little bit. And are you familiar with the books by Daniel Quinn? I don't know if you know Ishmael and the End of Civilization and those things.
No, I don't.
Okay.
No.
There's just the idea that since we were born and raised in modern culture, in a civilization that is based on a false paradigm, essentially, that it's not sustainable, it's difficult for us to imagine what life could be like in a sustainable culture in some way that we could enjoy it or appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of a futurist, part of your job is to paint the picture of a future that's preferred. But if you could speak about, could you paint the picture of how a preferred future would actually be desirable future? Like the one sentence from Daniel Quinn I wanted to quote was that something better than civilization is waiting for us. And that's what I imagine you mean.
I mean, it's a different kind of civilization, I think I'd want to say. I don't think civilization is a word we shouldn't band into narrow, but basically the kind of, the 21st century civilization is going to be very different from civilizations we've known in the past. And that's because we basically face these unique circumstances. And you just mentioned tell me what the book was about again. I just lost my thread there.
It was the End of Civilization was one of the books that says something better than civilization.
Well, you see, basically we will have an integrated, pluralistic, global society.
What is that?
Well, it's one that celebrates difference in the context of global unity. Now, let me illustrate that with there's a concept called world music. Now, world music is interesting. World music is very postmodern. We couldn't have had world music back in the modernist days because world music celebrates difference, but in the context of global harmony and unity. So it celebrates both of these together. That's a typical planetist value system, the celebration of difference within the context of the human oneness. And I could get, and for example, they are what I call world food halls. You know, there are 25 cuisines. And there's a set of table in the middle, and around the outside you have 25 different cuisines. You have Turkish, Italian, blah, blah, blah. You get a pick. Now, if you go back 40 years or 50 years, to eat somebody else's food was a form of tribal treachery. But now we actually love the difference. And I say, well, I can have my first course Turkish and my second course Afghan if I want to. And I love the difference. I celebrate the difference. So the celebration, they're two examples, what I call the world industries. Are world industries which are based on global harmony and the celebration of difference. Because, by God, we'd be a boring world if we tried to make us all the same. We'd have to treasure the difference, and it's the most wonderful thing, whether it's language or music or culture of any sort, or the different ways of doing things and perceiving things. So the important thing, see, I happen to think the next great convention will be like, we have one now on if you like, on biodiversity. The next one will be on cultural diversity, which is how do you protect cultural diversity as we become integrated in a single global society where more powerful ones will run over the top of weaker ones. So creating cultural resilience, and these are all parts of creating a sustainable, harmonious 21st century where we celebrate difference and human unity at the same time, simultaneously. And that's a very precious thing, and it's very characteristic of the 21st century. It has not happened before, to my knowledge, on a global scale. But you can pick up examples of that every day.
How do I create global resilience?
Well,
like I was just talking to a Maasai warrior who has never been in Australia before, and because of the drought in Africa, 90% of their cattle died, and their wealth and their food supply was just vanished. And what they're finding that the women actually who were not allowed to own the cattle were actually learning permaculture to produce food in these new circumstances for the village, and which is a drastic cultural change. But at the same time,
and a threat to the patriarchy.
Also, but still, how do you? But the men were actually glad that there was some stability in the food supply.
Taken off their shoulders. They were smart enough to know that.
So how can I preserve my culture? How can I be resilient?
But cultures don't stay the same and frozen. They adapt, but they adapt under the control of the people who are doing the adapting. I mean, if I change a culture from outside, that's wrong. But if cultural people say, well, I need now to eat more vegetables because there's less meat around, for example, like the Maasai might be considering, that's an adaptation they're making because they see that the culture is actually all about a set of rules we all have to have and share so we can live forever on the planet or in the world. Culture is like that. I mean, religion are both like that. For example, I could give you for example, the Hindus ban cows and the Pakistanis ban pigs. Now they do that because of the Taenia solium and Taenia saginara, the tapeworms in those things. So it's a health issue, but they gave it strength by providing with in a context of religious dogma. And if you look at the 10 Commandments of Christianity, they're all basically very sensible rules for having a functional society. But you say, God said this, therefore, oh my God, we better do it. And because, you didn't have an educated population, so you couldn't reason with the people. So you said, you've got to do the following because God said this thing. So the whole culture and religion are embedded like that. And there's a whole lot of things that I'm doing a lot of work on cultural adaptation. For example, I'm doing some work in the Central Pacific in the island of Nauru. Now, Nauru is a tiny little place. Nearly 80% of all the people over 30 have type 2 diabetes, and they're all obese. Now, how come? Well, if you look at their history, it's fairly simple because they evolved in a world of flush and famine. And people who put on weight quickly during the periods of plenty survive the periods of drought. So there's a positive selection towards people who put on weight quickly. So that, of course, the people who put on weight slowly died. And suddenly if you give them full-time 24/7 food, it's disastrous for them because, so what you have to do is adapt the culture. And am I making suggestions? Say, well, you have to have something like a Ramadan where you don't eat for a whole month except in the dark time. And see, I would say Ramadan or Lent are actually cultural adaptations for us to actually keep ourselves healthy and thin in a world we face it. And I could give you lots of examples of that. So these are cultural adaptations. So if you go back to Nauru or to Indigenous Australia where we have very similar problems, it's say, well, can we adapt our culture so we live a lifestyle which mimics the traditional lifestyle with more comfort and so they don't get type 2 diabetes and don't get obese? The answer is yes, because we go along with what I call a problem-centered approach. Oh, well, let's give them insulin and then let's give them a kidney transplant when they need one, rather than do it. So can we adapt the culture? So the answers for obesity type 2 in those cultures is in the areas of sociology and anthropology, not in medicine. And so working with them to think about, well, let's recreate our culture so we can actually be thin in a period of food plenty, continuous food plenty. So we mimic the old days when there were famines, but by voluntary culture. So when we starve, we might do a lot of dancing, a lot of praying, doesn't matter what. So I see culture as a continuously adapting thing, providing it's adapting. The adaptation is done by the people who are seeking to do the adaptation, and they're doing it for benefits they can perceive for themselves.
So Peter, this cultural adaptation is crucial for people to understand that things won't stay the same that they're comfortable with. And so how do I, as a person, go along with the culture that's changing? Like, as a person, as an individual, and you're prescribing clearly reasonable steps for a culture to evolve, that becomes sustainable, it becomes planet-centric. So how do I, as a person in my daily life, make that shift?
Well, we have to recognize that basically there are certain things we can shape for our future, but a lot of our future is going to be dependent on what others do. And if they all do the wrong thing, it doesn't matter what I do, it becomes insignificant. So what we have to do is work on the fact is we have to collaborate. Collaborate so we collectively protect ourselves and create a so basically the whole point about it is to get a gain, we need to share the pain. And providing that happens, and we all see the purpose of sharing the pain to get the gain, it's fine. But if in a society where it says some people get the pain and some people get the gain, forget it. So the communitarian nature of the 21st century, which basically is first allegiance to community over individuals. So communitarianism is different from individualism. Individualism says when rights are in conflict, the individual rights win, and community says when rights are in conflict, the community rights win. Now, the example of smoking in public or smoking on the planet, an example of communitarian culture, we actually all have to cease smoking on the planet so we can all survive. Okay. Now, once you get to that pain, you say, well, we have to share the pain to get the gain. And as long as the pain is shared, people will actually do that because they can see it in their collective self-interest, because they actually know this is something we have to do. So this, as I said, the equivalent of the village being flooded out, and we all have to work together to save ourselves. Otherwise, we fight amongst ourselves, we all get swept away by the flood. And so it comes around to the recognition that no man is an island entire of itself, and every man is part of the continent. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as much of promontory were, as much of the estate of my friend's own were. Any man death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know from whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. John Donne, 1624. Wow. The first planetist on the planet. He was saying, no man is an island. Our collective future is together. Mm-hmm. And if a clod be washed away by the sea, all of Europe suffers. Mm-hmm. And so on. Any man's diminishes me. My God. I mean, he said that all that time ago. And that particular devotion of his is just one of the most profound pieces of wisdom I can think of. And but basically he says to survive together we have to collaborate, and to thrive together we have to collaborate. Indeed, I invented a word called thrival. It doesn't exist in any dictionary, because we have survival as an aspirational goal, but thrival is a much better word as an aspirational goal. We all collectively aim to thrive together, not just survive together. That's a much more noble and much generous. So when I feel to perceive a lack of a word, I invent it. And it's interesting because the very fact that we've never created a word called thrival says a lot about the lack of loftiness of the aspirations of English-speaking people, because we haven't created a word for it. It doesn't matter.
Culture in a culture that's a thrival culture, thrival-centered culture. What would the institutions look like? I mean, right now in the patriarchal empire, basically we have hierarchical structured where whoever has the most pathological nature can most easily climb up the power ladder, and then we get top-heavy hierarchies that are top-heavy with psychopath-oriented psychology. So what's the way around that?
Well, the biggest force of democracy is the internet. I mean, you can now have, 10 million people can respond quickly. The Joseph Kony example in Uganda, where a whole pile of people said together, this guy's a bad man, we should take him out. They didn't succeed, but the important was that the whole awareness happened, because a lot of people found out about this nasty man who's taking kids and putting them to armies under the guise of Christianity, which makes it even worse. And so basically, the most powerful instrument now is democracy. Indeed, a mullah in Iran, who happens to be the Minister for Information, said the internet was a threat to Iran because the internet was a Trojan horse in which foreign soldiers were going to get into Iran. Very perceptive, he's right. And in other words, you can't now ideas spread ubiquitously, and one idea in one part of the planet is suddenly right of the world. And you can't control things anymore. You can't lock out information. You can't do what a Goebbels did all those years ago, tell people what they know and block out everything else. It's not possible. And so the reinforcement of the world of difference opinion and people ganging up. And now we have the toolkit, because we're so integrated as a society and we're so interdependent in our trade. 40% of all global trade is between nations now, and globalization is bringing more trade together. So now we have things called the boycott on services, the banning on trade, the strike on investment capital, and so on, okay? In other words, we can put these things on and say, you're a bad guy. We're going to make sure that you can't get access to your money in the banks, because the world will collaborate and say, we're going to let you get to this money because you're going to do evil things with it. We're going to get everyone to boycott your interests, all your goods and services. We're going to ban on your products and services. And when you want to borrow money to develop your country, we won't give you any money. Now, because we're so interdependent on the society, that's all beginning to happen. And by 2030 and 2050, it'll be so much more stronger. So the whole planet now can gang up on what I call the planetary pariahs. It's very hard to be a successful planetary pariah anymore. Ask the government of North Vietnam, of North Korea rather, or the government of Iran. You can't actually, everyone notices you're a bad guy or thinks you're a bad guy. They have an opinion about you being a bad guy. They say, we will actually, so right now Iran's in deep trouble because investment in Iran has gone to zero. Lots of people are not buying their oil except one or two people like the Indians. And there's and all these blogs. You know, I looked last time. The greatest number of blogs in any one country is, or second or third anyway, was Iran. And most of these blogs are housed in computers in Germany and places like that. And so the whole blogosphere now is full of Farsi language, of the Persian language, of the Iranian language, and they can't do anything about that. Because any time there's a corrupt action of government, they can't suppress it because it leaks out and the world knows about it. It's very hard. I mean, there's a lot of forces for good in this because we are now got to the point where global public opinion itself, and they're the values of planetism, basically, the 10 values of planetism, are shaping the whole planet. And values define what is to be, values define value and define what is valuable. Okay, what we highly value and find to be valuable, we want more of and create products and services for. So we want products and services now for gender equality and for democracy and for sustainability. They're the big growth areas of the 21st century economy. I did document this. So in my work, I talk to both people who are sort of on the outside the main kind of economic cycles, like people who might follow the work of Gaia and James Lovelock. But I also talk to the mainstream. Some of my customers are banks and mining companies. I preach a similar sort of thing, and I find that intelligent middle-class people who run these companies, they all have kids who are all basic planetists now. And so the question is, Daddy, what did you do to work today? It's a harder one to answer if they're not being very planetary in their behaviour. And it's slowly changing. And planetism is the values of ethical investments, really. If you look at the things that ethical investment companies do, it's very much my values, 10 values of planetism.
Can you tell us a story about Gen Y?
Yeah, I will. A couple. Gen Y. We in Australia have a thing called Anzac Day. Now, this is a day which commemorates the landing of the Australian forces in Gallipoli in April 1915. And they were massacred by the Turkish army who were waiting in Preston for them. And massive deaths and destruction. And this is our most solemn. Anzac Day means Australian and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand, okay, Australia and New Zealand Army Corps. Australia and New Zealand were the people who went in. They were sent in by the English, the old imperialist English, and they were massacred on the beaches. And every April the 25th, we have Anzac Day. Of course, in 2 years' time, we're going to have the 100th anniversary of Anzac Day. Now, what's interesting is that in my lifetime, I've never thought of going to Gallipoli because I just said, well, that's nothing to do with me. It's another war, it's another part of the world. I'm Australian. I'll celebrate it. But the Gen Ys all want to go to Gallipoli and sit on the beaches surrounded by people of different nationalities like Turks. And they say, well, it's important to me as an Australian to witness why Australians died in apparently noble cause on foreign soil all those years ago, because that was an early antecedent of planetism. It was also tied up with a bit of imperialism, of course, but there were things, the nobility of the young men who went there and died at Gallipoli says, we're going to end the tyranny of the dictatorships of Central Europe. And they went for all the noblest causes in the world. Whether they were wise or not to do that's not a matter, but the important point was the young people, so they want to go to a place called Villers-Bretonneux, which is in Flanders, where a massive, Australia was a tiny country of about 7 million in World War I, but more Australians died in World War I than Americans did. We had huge losses, and they were mostly in Flanders and in the Dardanelles, in that area around Gallipoli. And I use that as an example of how they are trying to reinterpret what it means to be Australian as a member of a planetary society. And I can give you lots of very similar examples, but the whole Gen Ys are saying, and see, Gen Ys expect to say, if I'm smart, I might just work in Buenos Aires and then go off to Munich and then go off to London. it doesn't stop me being Australian, but it redefines what I mean to be Australian. Not jingoistic Australian. I'm never going to leave my own country, wave my flag, and say every other part of the world is bad and or inferior. It's going to say that we actually, so Australians meet Australians overseas, and Gen Y, of course, they're travelling more and more, love the idea of working, so they might wander around the world and work in 5 different jobs. They might come back, they might not, but they see themselves as planetists already because the employment market is the whole planet, but they take the Australian culture with them, but in a culture which is not jingoistic and say all the other ones are nasty, or like it's tribalism, but we actually welcome difference and we want to work with difference. That's a classic example of what Gen Ys do.
And there was this, there was a concert you were speaking at recently.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so there's a place called the Golden Plains Music Festival. It's west of Melbourne, and last year I attended this place to speak in a 3-day music festival because the organisers said they wanted to have somebody speak to this whole audience on the Sunday morning for an hour and a half. It was a long weekend. And they hired me to do it. They said, we're going to come and talk about the future. And these kids are all university undergraduates. They're sophisticated young thinkers between, all Gen Ys, so between about, say 18 and 23 or something like that, okay? Now 10,000 of them, all living in tents. So I went on the stage and I said this: tribalism is first allegiance to tribe, nationalism is first allegiance to nation, planetism is first allegiance to planet. Put your hands up if you're a planetist, and 10,000 hands went up. Wow, it blew me away. I could feel the hair sticking up on the back of my neck. It was one of those kind of moments that I actually understood and witnessed personally the power of that. And Gen Ys are different, even from Gen Xers. Gen Ys are really early adopted, particularly the educated ones, because you have all the people who are uneducated, they're still back and fight. They can still be neo-Nazis for that matter. But the ones who go on to university or finish school reasonably well, and that's the most of us these days, see themselves having a national identity but within a planetary society. And they don't see any conflict between the two. Indeed, they want to collaborate with the rest of the planet because ultimately first allegiance is to planet. Doesn't mean we're ignoring nationalism, we're just putting it in a secondary place to planetism. First allegiance must be to planet because that's a shared home of all humanity. We don't have any choice. That's what we've got. No choice at all. This is our only home. And if we fuck it up, there's no other way, no other place for it, So we have to find a way so we can live in harmony. And so my ways and ways for intercultural harmony are a huge area. I'm doing a lot of work in intercultural harmony and interreligious harmony. You would know that we need lots of products and services in intercultural and interreligious harmony today. Because we don't want people going to religious wars or wars based on tribal difference anymore. The planet can't stand anymore. We now can create such havoc on each other. We can destroy everything. It's like the smoker in the cafe destroying everyone else, the health of everyone else on the planet in the cafe. That's the choice we have. And we are now facing this, and there's a dawn of realization of the whole of humanity, and particularly by 2030, there will be nearly 4.5 billion of us on the planet, educated middle-class people. And they say, well, we have to shape this society so it's fit for our children and grandchildren to live on, and the rest of humanity.
Across the world, there are people who regard themselves as unemployed, some of them even unemployable. And the mistrust and pain and the suffering of people living in this story that they are unemployed seems a little ridiculous in the face of what you're talking about in terms of the huge, huge necessity for intercultural harmony products and services.
All of those things. Well, I actually do a lot of work on that. And I work with kids in Year 9 who are thinking about what they might do at university. I say, well, what will you study? You're a future. Tell me what you're studying at university. Where will the jobs be? And I said, it doesn't matter what you study at university. There no relation to what you're doing when you're 35. Right. So follow your destiny. So then I say, well, what's destiny? It's insight. Before you look forward and think about what you might do, we're all good at something. So destiny equals aptitude, what I'm good at, and passion, what I love doing. So before getting a job, the job that you're going to be doing when you're 35, if you happen to be 17 today, hasn't been invented anyway. And so you might as well say, well, how do I prepare for a world when I don't even know what the jobs will be? Well, I have to know myself and strengths and weaknesses superbly well. So I get people to do what I call a destiny dialogue. I get the young person or a person coming out of jail before they go out in the world outside, or a refugee arriving on Australian shore and say, what do I do now for work? Before you have foresight about what you might do, you have to have insight of who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and what your destiny is. And Henry Ford famously said the secret to a successful life is to understand what is one's destiny to do and to do it. And it's aptitude plus passion. So I get people to say, well, surround yourself with your loved one and your friends and have 4 columns. Well, I'm good at that, I'm bad at that, I love doing that, and I hate doing that. Mm-hmm. Then I get people to think about, well, how do I define that in 2 words? And I can pick up an adjective and a noun. So I became a social entrepreneur. I'm an innovation broker. I say, it doesn't matter whether there's not a single one on the planet, that's what I am. So I'm an innovation broker, whatever, a social entrepreneur. Only 10 years ago, social entrepreneurs did not exist. Okay? So, and they said, well, that defines you. And that defines your work, that which gives meaning to your life. The art form is to turn that into employment, generating dollars from it. So then you go forward to the Planistus future and all the goods and services which are coming out of the Planistus future and say, well, what are the emerging work possibilities that best fit my destiny? Okay, so that's the foresight. I call the first one destiny dialogue, the second one the foresight destination dialogue. And then we turn around and go to the hindsight bit, which I call derivation dialogue. And I bring 2 things from the past that will shape my capacity to shape the future. One is the heritage, the priceless things I have from my parents and my friend, which make me special and my special gifts. And the other is the baggage, all the rubbish in my life that's going to prevent me from changing. So all the people I talk about, we have baggage conversations. They say, look, if you can't change, let's talk about your heritage and your baggage and your destiny and your destination. So we have that entire conversation around those things. It's because the world of work, the idea of a job for life is gone. We'll all have many jobs. So the fundamental thing is, what are my special capabilities? We all come into this world good at some things and bad at other things. And thank God we're all different. That means what we have to do is find what we're good at and love doing, aptitude and destiny and so on, and then go into destination under that. So I have an entire process I work with to how people can shape their lives. When they get to that point, say, well, what do I do now? I'm come out of jail, I've just arrived on a foreign shore, I'm just about to make a major choice of what I'm going to study at university, or so on, okay? Or I've just been damaged into a traumatic car accident and I have to put my life back together again and go back to work, and I can't work in the old job, I have to find something new. In other words, all these moments when you say, well, what do I do now? So the question is, what am I? And therefore, what do I want to become in the workplace? And I find that if you actually work that way, so people find their passion and say, can I get a job doing what I love doing and what I'm good at? Suddenly the problem doesn't exist anymore. Because they say, well, okay, you focus around and say, I now have a deep understanding of my own capabilities and my interests and my things I love to do and hate to do. And that's priceless to me. That makes my unique imprint. So what I have to do is find in the world of work possibilities the best fit between what's coming towards us in a new job opportunity and what I can give to the world. Because we'll have a lot of happy workers if they're all doing what they love to do, right? And most people don't have that luxury. So in a world of infinite possibilities job-wise, and that's the 21st century, it's best that we all find the best fit between what we're good at and love doing, what our destiny is, and fit ourselves into that. And the productivity of the planet will go up astronomically anyway if you do that.
Is that in your new book?
Yeah, it's in my new book.
The Destiny Conversation Process.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Yeah. What kind of thing haven't I asked you about that you would love to tell us? These are people who are intelligent, they're impassioned, and they're bridge builders for next culture. Yeah. They understand the necessity, and they want to just practical advice. And
I think the most important thing I want is understand that you dream your dreams about what you might do, and never let practicality get in the way of your dreams. In other words, you aspire high and you say, well, I want to go over there. It's like John Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon and back again. There's no other choice. You either didn't go to the moon, you can't go halfway to the moon and settle for the difference. And the point is, the moment you actually you have an aspirational goal and then you lower it, the passion for commitment to going there. So I said, never lower your aspirational goals because of the reality around you. But on the output side, on the product side, you're realistic. You say, when you work your butt off to get a whole loaf and you only got a half a loaf. Well, celebrate getting a half loaf and say, well, now how can I get smart and get the other half? So in other words, never let your aspirational goals be tempered by the world around you. You have a dream and it gives you energy and vision. There's nothing more uplifting in the world than a big dream and a vision that you find relevant to your own future or the future of the planet. And, follow your bliss, follow your dream, as Joseph Campbell said, really, it's important to actually never downsize your aspirations because, that's unrealistic. Once you dream, do something more practical. That's rubbish. In the world of possibility, it's infinite possibility. But you let the pragmatism inform your outcomes, but not your aspirations. It's really important difference. It's a single thing. And the other thing is, imagine yourself as both the manager of self, being the resilient future taker, being able to bounce off things when things happen and just get on with it, and the purple future maker, having a dream and making it come true. And I have a whole set of, you see, the leader, the manager part of this is with the probable future, the what will be person, and the leader is the preferred future, what should or could be. And also the strategies that managers and leaders use to get there are different. The manager part of it is what I call the problem-centered strategies. You say, well, these are all the roadblocks and the obstacles we have to remove. Now, if you're spending all your time removing bad things from the future, you're clearly creating a future which is merely less awful. Not wonderful, not heroic, not magnificent. To create one of those, you have to imagine a wonderful, heroic future. Now, the leader has the dream, the heroic future, the vision, and they create a strategy which is basically has 5 parts to it, what I call a mission-directed strategy. These are the improvements we need to make. These are the impediments we need to remove. These are the heritage we need to keep. These are the baggage we need to remove. And forgotten the last one. Always do. But heritage, improvement initiatives. I mean, what are new initiatives we need to take? What improvements we need to make? What are the improvements we need to make? What's the heritage we need to keep? What's the baggage we need to throw out? Did I get that right? I don't know. But that's all in my book too.
Mm-hmm. So tell me your personal vision then of a heroic, wonderful future.
Well, my whole book, Destination 2050, is imagining a planet. The whole planet is prosperous, sustainable, secure, harmonious and just in the year 2050. We'd all like one of those, wouldn't we? The question is it possible? Well, in my book, Destination 2050, I actually point out that we're actually halfway there without knowing it. So we have to invent all the new ways and wheres and the market, because actually people, all educated middle-class people in particular, and there's 4.5 billion by the year 2030, all would like to live in a world like that. They don't want wars. They want a harmony. They want their kids to grow up and be successful on a planetary-wide scale. All those things are facts. So there's 5 key words. So filling in those details. So my Destination 2050 is a planetary society that's prosperous, harmonious, sustainable, secure and just. And that kind of 5 words, just 5 descriptive words. And around each of those, you can have an entire conversation. Mm-hmm. But so if we don't visualize that, we'll never get there. We cannot work to create a future which we do not first imagine.
Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. It's Clint Callahan, Mixed Culture News, Melbourne, Australia.